Entwined is a podcast about how so much of the world around us is wound or twisted together. This podcast strives to lay bare unexposed or indiscernible connections using historical and anecdotal sources. I am Elliot Gladstone, and alongside P.S. McKay, this is Entwined. Mercury is an interesting element, and it can be found on the periodic table sandwiched right between gold and thallium. It's actually quite amazing, and the only metal to exist in a liquid state while sitting at room temperature. It has been referred to over time as Quicksilver, primarily because of the way it looks and moves, but what is more interesting is that its chemical symbol Hg comes from the Greek word hydergrium, which has been translated into English as liquid silver. Mercury has been used for many things over the years, and many uses have been legally banned due to the health effects and environmental impact. Mercury is dangerous and has been released into the environment over time in a variety of ways. As mercury is released into the ground, water, or atmosphere, it will eventually get redistributed into the water and devoured by sea life. Big fish eat small fish, so the bigger the fish, the more mercury they will bring along with them to the dinner party. Fish are a huge or exclusive part of the diet of many animals, such as birds, otters, penguins, seals, whales, and many land animals, which include bears. For a long time, mercury was a key component of thermometers, which could be found in most homes around the world. These devices still exist today, but in a very different form, focusing their use on electronic thermometers or gas alcohol versions, which measure temperature just as accurately. Mercury has also been used in barometers, which is an instrument for measuring atmospheric pressure. It has been used in contact switches, batteries, paints, mirrors, fungicides, pesticides, and disinfectants. Mercury can be used to make jewelry and was highly sought after due to being one of the few things which was able to react with gold. The process of creating gold or silver amalgam is a product in which leaves at the end behind a pure, amazing, glorious rock of gold. Unfortunately, this process can poison the environment because, as I've mentioned, mercury, in addition to its other uses, can be very toxic in any form. It has also been used in compact fluorescent light bulbs, often referred to as CFLs in very small amounts. Mercury in a gas state allows for more efficient use of electricity in these lamps. It is actually pretty interesting, and the following is absolutely an oversimplification. The electricity is introduced inside the lamp, which gets the mercury all excited, and then alters the electrons inside the tube. Since mercury is such a party animal, it starts to crash, and as this happens, ultraviolet light emits, and then reacts with the phosphorus inside the lamp, which results in visible light. Simple, right? The good news here, for anyone thinking about toxic fumes, coming from just about every CFL you've ever thrown away, take some comfort in the fact that mercury is only in vapor form while the lamp is on and current is running through it. Another antiquated use of the deadly metal was in the production of felt in the 1800s, which stems back to the Middle Ages, when the fourth bishop of Rome accidentally stumbled upon, or possibly stole completely, the process from an ancient tribe. Originally, the fur was separated by hand from the hide, where today that process is totally automated. The fibers need to be matted together, which was a procedure that used heat and pressure to create the felt, and it hasn't really changed much over time. Felt was an instrumental part of headwear in the 1800s, and the use of mercury was introduced to help the process of turning the fur into felt. Hat makers during this time period, let's assume somewhere from 1860 to 1880, would find themselves in shops or factories working tireless hours to make a hat which the end user could purchase for, let's say, $3 to upwards of $20. These shops often lacked appropriate ventilation, which reduced the chances the hat makers would be breathing clean air. The air was often a mix of oxygen, smoke or other carbon, and mercury vapors, which created a slow but steady buildup of mercury in the hat makers' bodies. If that wasn't dangerous enough, these men found themselves handling the mercury-laden felt with their bare hands, unprotected, which contributed to their unhealthy and already elevated levels of mercury. Over time, these hat makers began to show symptoms of what we now know as mercury poisoning. These symptoms include, and are no way limited to, hallucinations, trouble walking, loss of balance, lack of focus, tremendous mood swings, memory loss, depression, being easily bothered, irritable or grouchy, having anxiety, or shaking in the extremities, primarily the arms and hands, which was referred to as Hatter's shakes, or, in some areas, Danbury shakes. The frequent level of exposure to elemental mercury hat makers encountered, combined with the symptoms being unique to the trade, helped identify the disposition as Mad Hatter syndrome, or Mad Hatter's disease. Strangely enough, mercury was not used in this trade after World War II, but the phrase still gets used today to describe the effects of mercury poisoning. Lewis Carroll, which was the nom de plume for Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, the man who wrote the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in the year 1865. As many of you know, the book contained a character with the moniker the Mad Hatter, who was one of the most loved characters from the book. The Mad Hatter can be seen showing many of the telltale symptoms mentioned earlier. Some of the more obvious ones that come to mind are hallucinations, lack of focus, memory loss, and mood swings. The Hatter was absolutely mad, which was a fact which was demonstrated throughout the book. It is true that Carroll didn't coin the phrase, as evidence suggests Mad Hatter syndrome had been around and discussed in social circles at least 30 years before Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was published. The Mad Hatter, as illustrated by John Tenniel in Carroll's book and later envisioned by Disney and Tim Burton, wore a style of top hat with the number 10/6 on the front. In the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Hatter tells us these numbers refer to the cost of the hat, 10 shillings and a sixpence. The Hatter could make many styles of hats, and joked that even the one on his head was for sale. There are many other styles of top hat in the top hat family, which include the beaver hat, the chimney hat, silk hat, the high hat, and the stovepipe hat. One famous American who elected to wear the stovepipe hat was our 16th President of the United States, President Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln wore many styles of top hat over the years, but in his second term, he started to continuously wear the stovepipe hat, which is the way many of us remember him today. Lincoln was reportedly partial to the taller hats because of how they added to his already dominating 6'4" frame. What many of you do not know about President Abraham Lincoln was that before he became president, he took a commonly prescribed pill called Blue Mass. Blue Mass was a pill which was small in size and often used to treat tuberculosis, constipation, infection, as well as a variety of aches and pains. President Lincoln reportedly used the blue pill to help him with general melancholy. What was not known to anyone at the time was that these tiny blue pills contained upwards of 100% of the daily allowance of mercury. Those who were close to Lincoln noted that he was a friendly man, but in the 1850s was prone to wild mood swings. Some have even noted that during this time, Lincoln would resort to violence, and there was one well-documented event where Lincoln grabbed a politician and shook him with so much force that his teeth chattered. In the end, President Lincoln stopped taking these blue mass pills because he noted that, well, they made him cross. Around the same time President Abraham Lincoln was sporting his stovepipe hat, Lewis Carroll, remember the man who wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, wrote to a close friend by the name of Tom Taylor. Tom Taylor was a journalist, critic, biographer, public servant, and playwright. In his letter, Lewis Carroll asked his friend Tom Taylor for help with a book he was working on. He wrote, and I quote, "I should be very glad if you could help me in fixing a name for my fairy tale, which Mr. Tenniel, in consequence of your kind introduction, is now illustrating for me, and which I hope to get published before Christmas. The heroine spends an hour underground and meets various birds, beasts, and no fairies endowed with speech. The whole thing is a dream, but that I don't want revealed until the end. I first thought of Alice's Adventures Underground, but that was pronounced too like a lesson book, in which instruction about mines would have been administered in the form of a grill. Then I took Alice's Golden Hour, but that I gave up, having a dark suspicion that there is already a book called Lily's Golden Hours. All of these at present I prefer, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. In spite of your morality, I want something sensational. Perhaps you can suggest a better name than any of these. It is interesting to see the author, Carroll, seeking assistance from a friend to help him with the decision he had unknowingly already made. Tom Taylor was indeed uniquely qualified for this role and made sense in asking him for help in this way because he had written over 100 plays and managed to aptly name each one. One of those such plays was a comedy, which was called Our American Cousin. This play was unique because 10 years earlier, Taylor had attempted to deliver it to the public as a drama and it absolutely flopped. Taylor decided to retool it, add in some comedy, add in some improv, and re-release it to find it being a hit. So much of a hit that famous people and politicians managed to find their way onto the guest list. On Good Friday in 1865, that's April 14th for those who are interested, Tom Taylor's play, Our American Cousin, was scheduled to run at Ford's Theater, which was previously an old abandoned Christian church in Washington, D.C. The Ford brothers set out a very special invitation to a woman by the name of Mary Todd Lincoln, which was accepted. Yes, Mary Todd Lincoln was the First Lady and wife to President Abraham Lincoln. The First Lady and her husband decided to attend the play, which is something that they both were reported to have enjoyed frequently. President Abraham Lincoln, now in his second term, no longer taking the blue mass pills, sat with his wife and friends wearing a stovepipe hat. Lincoln was shot and murdered that night, and as his stovepipe hat fell off his head and lay next to him on the floor, his assassin, John Wilkes Booth, fled the Ford's Theater, while 1,700 in attendance screamed in panic. Booth was on the run for just shy of 2 weeks and managed to get as far as Virginia before federal soldiers caught up with him. Booth ended up on a tobacco farm inside a barn surrounded by the Northern soldiers. His time on the run had come to an end, and he could either try to surrender or potentially shoot his way out. As the barn was burning, which was the result of a fire Booth set himself, a soldier by the name of Boston Corbett decided to take matters into his own hands. Corbett took aim and let loose the bullet that killed Booth. Boston Corbett struck Booth in the neck, and the man eventually died as the result of his wound. But ladies and gentlemen, our story does not end there. While Corbett was in his 20s, after he had murdered the man who killed President Abraham Lincoln, he became a Christian man and was baptized with a plan to grow his beard and hair long and spread the word of God. Many who knew Corbett identified him as different, which in the 1800s came with more weight than it would today. Corbett had enlisted and re-enlisted 3 times in the Northern Army and found himself hospitalized several times as a result. Corbett was not without personal struggle, and in one night he self-castrated himself with a pair of scissors, only to end up in the hospital, which isn't something a man in his right mind would attempt, even on his worst day. Boston Corbett likely had an adequate pair of scissors because he had spent several years as a tradesman before enlisting in the Army. Even after he famously shot and killed the man who had assassinated the president, he fell back into this trade, fell back into the job he held before his 3 tours of duty. He fell back into a job which he was good at, which he understood, which he was able to do with some confidence. The man who shot John Wilkes Booth, a man who went by the name Boston Corbett, was not just a little different. Folks, he was also an accomplished hatter. Thank you for listening. This has been Entwined. Entwined is a podcast that releases every other week and is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Elliot Gladstone and P.S. McKay. This episode was written by Elliot Gladstone. Please tune in next time to see what P.S. McKay has in store for us. For more information about the show or the authors, please check out entwinedpodcast.com or visit our Twitter page at Entwined Podcast.